Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, how y'all doing? Today's Thursday, May the 28th, 2020. And let me just start off by saying it's been a hell of a year, hell of a ride. We're still here, we're still alive, right? So hopefully y'all doing well, hopefully y'all safe. All right, now let's get into it. Reason why I'm making this video. There's been a lot of discussion on my timeline, um, about race and race issues. We're seeing it all over. Right now we're watching as Minneapolis goes through, some protests and some riots, and rightfully so. Saw some of it happening in Los Angeles yesterday as well. Now, my city is definitely going through its fair share of racial issues. It feels as though we're kind of, I would say, maybe one incident away from being in a similar state. And there is one major agitator in my city. Well, there are a bunch of major agitators, but there's one agitator in particular who pops their head up, and likes to just kind of dig into the black community, and really dig into the young members of the black community, and more specific, the members of the hip hop community who happen to be black. It's almost as though they pride themselves on being the newspaper who can be the most disrespectful to dead members of the hip hop community, and more specifically, dead black members of the hip hop community. Now, this paper in question has been called racist before I was even born. Now, I'm 38 years old, so I'm no spring chicken, coming up on 40. And the fact that this newspaper, borderline tabloid newspaper, has been called out for this bullshit for this long and is still in existence is somewhat disgusting. Now, in case you're wondering which newspaper I am referring to, let me just get it up here on the screen for you. There you go. So we're referring to the Toronto Sun. Now, I often refer to the Toronto Sun as the cum rag of Toronto print media. Because this is what I feel, that they're really only good for collecting dog piss and dog shit, excrement, and basically being used as a cum rag. That's all this newspaper is really good for. Occasionally, they've got a decent looking sunshine girl inside of that paper. I did like the sports section in that paper when I was a kid, and I did like the comic section in that paper when I was a kid, but I'm no longer a kid. And for some reason, I could never really understand when I was younger why my mother would tell me that the Toronto Sun was really for uneducated people, until I was about in my 20s or so when I really started to get the gist of why she said that. So, let me reiterate again, for anybody out there who didn't hear what I said the first time and for some reason cannot read the ticker tape scrolling across the bottom, the Toronto Sun newspaper is merely the cum rag of print media. Now, there's a reason why so many of us are actually up in arms right now, and rightfully so. Again, this newspaper likes to dig at the black community. More specifically, has been using the deaths of members of the black hip-hop community to sell their bullshit cum rag newspaper for quite some time. Now, yesterday, they took it upon themselves to print this as their cover. Let me just get that off there. All right. So this was their cover yesterday. Now, first and foremost, let me say rest in peace to Houdini. I did not know this young man. However, I do know a few people who did know this young man. I can't comment on how he was murdered. I think it's a shame. I think it's a tragedy. So those comments I can definitely say. But personally, I don't know if it involved anything in his life that maybe, was it illicit or not? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's neither here nor there. The fact of the matter is, a 21-year-old man was stricken down in what was, maybe not even the prime of his life yet. 21. 21 years old. Now, rather than show any type of empathy or any type of sympathy towards this man, towards his family, towards his friends, towards anybody in his vicinity, this is the cover of the newspaper yesterday. Who made Houdini vanish? Now, this is disgusting. It's utterly disgusting. It's because they don't use this type of verbiage or language when they're talking about other type of artists. They barely use this type of verbiage or language when they're talking about the tow truck wars that are going on, right? And I sure as hell don't ever see them use this verbiage or language when they're talking about murdered white people. But let there be a young rapper who was murdered, 21 years old, and this is the cover that they use. Now, I did see a comment on Facebook as well by somebody who had blocked me a few years ago, where they said that this was witty. Motherfucker, there's nothing witty about this. It's disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. But again, some people don't see it as such because although they can use the black community's music, although they can claim to have black friends, and they can party when, a sports team full of black people win championships in their city, they cannot show empathy towards the death of a young black man. All right. So one newspaper cover. We're all up in arms about this. But there was one other newspaper cover that really, really got me a few months back. I'm going to show it in a second because a really, really interesting story which kind of drives my point home a little bit more. Before I do show this newspaper cover, again, let me say rest in peace to Houdini. You had potential for a lot of greatness, and I'm sorry that somebody took you down, like I said, in what could have been the prime of your life or before the prime of your life. We got to stop this shit. We got to stop this shit as a people. We got to stop this shit as a city. It's a whole other topic we could discuss because we're talking about, again, the cum rag of print media, the bullshit ass, racist Toronto fucking Sun. Okay? So, rest in peace to Houdini. Now, a few months back in February, there was another murder of another Toronto hip-hop artist, very young man. And it just so happens that I had worked with his stepmother. I also had his grandmother as a friend on my Facebook. And it didn't even dawn on me till after I made a post sending my condolences and his grandmother reached out to me that she was in fact a friend of mine and that I in fact worked with his stepmother for quite some time. You know what I mean? Like they're almost family friends. So I didn't even know that this young man had got that far into music or that they were that closely related. Again, just sending out my condolences and his people had reached out to me. And at this time, I had a lot of people who were saying negative things about this young man on my Facebook, not knowing that his grandmother was reading the comments. All right, but the one thing that stood out to me when this young man was murdered, aside from the fact that I knew his family, aside from the fact that my best friend lived in the same complex as him, was the Toronto Sun. So again, when this young man was murdered, this is the newspaper cover that the Toronto Sun decided to use. All right. So, you notice here, it says rap sheet. Bullets and beats go hand in hand with Toronto's hip hop scene. It's possible. I'm not going to debate that. I'm not going to say that there aren't, issues within some rappers in the Toronto hip hop scene. However, what I will say is this, and this is something that doesn't get discussed very often. Canada's hip hop scene in a whole is becoming very Caucasian. It's becoming very white. And to an outsider, you might be thinking, well, what are you talking about? But if you actually live within Toronto or start going to shows outside of Toronto and you are a black rapper, you've probably noticed within the last 5 years that when you look around, there aren't many black rappers, especially outside of Toronto. However, if you'd read the Toronto Sun, anytime a black rapper was murdered in Toronto, you would think that every fucking rapper in Toronto, matter of fact, every rapper in Canada was black and that we're all involved in some type of drug dealing or murder. Bullshit, BS. They don't ever talk about that shit and they don't talk about whatever, happens within these white rappers. Again, How many of these guys driving tow trucks might have been white rappers? You know what I'm saying? Just don't know. It's just the way the Toronto Sun puts it out there. So they made it seem like bullets and beats go hand in hand in Toronto's hip hop scene, and this kid has some crazy rap sheet. But that's not where this story ends. You see, on this day, they had what was called a double newspaper cover. For those of y'all who don't know what a double newspaper cover is, basically this, what you're seeing on the screen, was the main cover. They had a pull-off cover, almost like collector's edition, if you wanted to save it. Now, that particular day, there was a world-famous rock group who was, in fact, putting out an album. This was the double cover that they used. Now, you can check the date. Friday, February the 7th. And you can check the date on the last cover. Friday, February the 7th. Now, let's take a look at this. What does it say here? No features. No Swedish songwriters. No trap beats. 100% uncut rock. Now, what is this underlining all the words here? Oh, that's cocaine. You see the dollar there, right? What are you trying to imply? That cocaine goes hand in hand with rock music. But guns and murder, let me put up this trigger finger here because y'all can't see that one. Guns and murder go hand in hand with hip hop. Do you see the contradiction here? Do you see what is actually happening here? You see, when it comes to drugs, a driver in the crime that happens within the black community, a driver that happens within the hip hop community, it's all hands on deck when it comes to policing, judging, wagging fingers, and blaming when it's hip hop and when it's young and black. But when it comes to cocaine, and when it comes to drugs, and when it comes to rock music, and when it comes to Caucasian people in this city, it's just considered pure, uncut, unadulterated motherfucking fun. Doesn't get any more blatant than that. Doesn't get any more ignorant than that. Doesn't get any more fucked up than that. Same day. The same day they try to blame hip hop, saying hip hop goes hand in hand. You know what I'm saying? The same day they say hip hop goes hand in hand with bullets, beats, and guns, right? They give you this cover saying rock goes line for line with cocaine. You can't make this shit up. Same fucking day. You see, this is how they treat young black artists in this city. This is how they treat hip hop in this city. Matter of fact, I'm going to be 100% honest with you. This is how the Toronto Sun and a lot of people treat people of color in this country. So while we outraged about the newspaper cover, and while we're outraged about what's going on in Minneapolis, and while we're outraged about the continuous treatment or mistreatment of black people by the police, we need to call these media motherfuckers out. We need to call the Toronto Sun out. But we also need to call our friends out, or our so-called friends out. You know, the ones who make subtle comments and think they can make them because we're friends. Or the ones who make these comments on Facebook, but you're too afraid to say anything to them because they're your friends. You see, all it takes is somebody just using their assumptions, their notions, and their prejudices of who anybody is as a people, using their positions of power like the Toronto Sun is doing to continuously drive home a message that is not only disgusting, but is vile and repugnant. And it continues to plague generations of people. Not just the person who died, but this is going to plague his family. And it's not going to stop with Houdini. And it doesn't stop with Bully, because the next murdered rapper is going to be on this cover. And regardless of the good that that person has done in their life, the Toronto Sun is going to use that person's death to sell newspapers and try to highlight them as a negative person. But they don't do it to the white rappers. And when it comes to rock and roll, drugs are okay. But when it comes to hip hop, they're a death sentence. Very contradictory. Very black and white without bringing up race. You know what I'm saying? So it's time we call this shit out, man. It's time we really call this shit out. Boycott this paper, but don't just stop with the newspaper. When you see associates of yours, regardless of how close you are, posting stuff online, saying things online, relying on stereotypical racial tropes, call them out for that shit. Even if it's not your race that is being offended, call them out for that shit. So because we're reaching a point where we have to have allies. Because we cannot win by ourselves. So we have to start defending one another. We have to start protecting one another. And we have to start calling out people like the Toronto Sun and some of our friends out for their bullshit. Or it's never gonna stop. Rest in peace to Houdini. Rest in peace to anybody who's been murdered. Rest in peace to anybody out there who's had injustice done to them, right? But more importantly, let's fix up and do better as a people. Because really, we've only got one life to live, y'all. And before we know it, we're either going to be on our deathbed or looking at our deathbed. So let's start being happier. Let's start being better to one another. One love, y'all. Peace.